This episode of History Saver is brought to you by Addressing Gettysburg. Addressing Gettysburg is a podcast that shares great experiences, quality programs, awesome guests, and is a welcoming community for all who love Gettysburg. So join in with host Matt Callery and find out why Addressing Gettysburg is one of the top-rated podcasts online today. You can find them on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Castbox, Podbean, Google Podcasts, TuneIn, and on Instagram, Facebook, and of course, right here on YouTube. So check out Addressing Gettysburg today, where history is not boring. Thank you to Addressing Gettysburg for sponsoring this video.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
We have made our way into West Virginia, and we're perhaps one of the most historic places that is associated with the American Civil War, and that's Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. This is where General Thomas Stonewall Jackson would, up under the order from Robert E. Lee with Special Order 191, bring his men here to Harper's Ferry with the intention of pushing out the federal troops in this area. And this is the extreme of the Union line here, actually at the Visitor Center. So when you come here, you're actually at the extreme of the Visitor Center of the Union lines here. We have made it to Boler Heights here in Harper's Ferry, and if you could see behind me, there are several artillery pieces here, and that is because the Federal Army used this as an artillery platform. And then when the Confederates up under Hill and Jackson attacked this place, well, they took out these guns and then turned them on the Federal forces along with also their artillery. You can't really see it too well through the trees, but behind us through the trees is the city of Harper's Ferry, and that's where the guns were trained that forced the federal troops to surrender there on September the 15th, 1862. So right through these trees is Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. I'm gonna end up saying Virginia, I just know it, but Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, and that is the city where these guns were pointing to as the Confederates up under A.P. Hill and Stonewall Jackson turned the guns on the town. So pretty cool to actually be standing here in this spot. Now Miles knew the Confederates were coming. His cavalry reported Southern troops advancing from 3 different directions. The Union Army's trying to push into this Confederate held town that's known as the breadbasket of the Confederacy. And he was ordered to hold Harper's Ferry until the last extreme. Miles divided his forces to retain Maryland Heights, the highest mountain, which is directly behind us. And he was to defend this mountain, Boler Heights, the longest ridge. Miles watched Stonewall Jackson approach with 14,000 men spread across Schoolhouse Ridge. Word arrived that Miles' soldiers had lost a fight for Maryland Heights, and Boler Heights, where we stand, stood as the Union Army's last great bastion. Sergeant Nicholas DeGaff of the 115th New York said, "We were greatly surprised at finding ourselves in the face of the enemy so soon. Felt proud in being considered worthy of such a trust and determined to our duty." So they were determined to hold this place at all costs. Pretty neat. So the Union Army's coming in to this area. This kind of gives you an idea of how this is set up. We are right here at Boler Heights. Miles has 14,500 men. He's got Walker coming from behind him at London Heights for 3,600 men. McLaws is coming from behind him on Maryland Heights with 8,000 men. A.P. Hill has 5,000 men to our left. Lawton to our center with 5,000 men. And J.R. Jones with 4,000 men to our right. So he is in every way in this position surrounded by the Confederate Army. They have no choice but to give it up. All right, so we've made it to our next location here. And today, we're in a very cool place that I've always wanted to see. And I want to bring you guys along with me to talk a little bit about the history of this place. We're in Harper's Ferry. So, and unless I want to be creamed, I probably need to get off these tracks. So, stick around. So the building you're looking at right now is the B&O Railroad House or train station, and this is standing for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, which is one of the things that helps make Harper's Ferry so vital as the breadbasket entryway to the Confederacy. And Harper's Ferry was established as an arsenal by George Washington in the late 1700s because of the supply lines. Pretty neat. So where we are right now is on the main street of Harper's Ferry. And during the fall of 1862, Confederate General Robert E. Lee launched the Maryland Campaign, which intended to attract European support for the Confederacy and gain recruits for the Army. Once he moved into Maryland, he issued orders, or Special Order 191, which was a plan for his was a plan to disrupt the 13,000 man garrison here at Harper's Ferry. Now his hope was that the federal troops here at Harper's Ferry would retreat whenever his forces come upon a town, but instead they stayed here. So, fearing this Union force could hamper with his communication supply lines, Lee issued that Order 191 and sent General Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson to capture this garrison. And this siege lasted September the 12th through the 15th of 1862 and primarily helped lead to the Battle of Antietam. So we're just going to take a look around Harper's Ferry as we're here. Talk a little bit about John Brown's raid and may hit on that a little bit, but pretty cool. Now for all you guys that know me, you know I'm a sucker for coffee. So we're going to go here to Battlegrounds Bakery and Coffee in Harper's Ferry and see if we can't find us some good coffee. So pretty neat little confectionery shop set up here. Was probably what it looked like during the Civil War. So pretty cool. So German immigrant Frederick Roeder was a prosperous baker whose confectionery shop you just saw, and he had 7 children and was a widower. And he was a widow, and he was also about to die. The 4th of July was normally a day of celebration, but not this year. Not in 1861, as he buried his wife in March, Anna Marie. The following month, the Civil War erupted, and a Union sympathizer, he longed to catch a glimpse of the United States flag flying on the Maryland shore once again. So venturing out to the Potomac River, he gazed across the Stars and Stripes, but was struck by a ricocheting bullet fired by a Union soldier. He crawled back into this building, which was his home, and he died here. And he was the first townsperson to be killed during the war. Pretty neat. So we're now in this small museum here at Harper's Ferry, highlighting the Civil War here at Harper's Ferry. And I'm just taking you through. We're not going to really talk too much about what you're seeing because it's small. But a couple things. This is one of the types of shells that was fired here. It's a 100-pound solid shot shell. And then you got the battle flag here of the 126th New York Regiment, who were here at Harper's Ferry. So Harper's Ferry in the late 1700s was established by George Washington as an arsenal. It produced thousands of muskets here, including this 1816 Harper's Ferry musket that was later converted in 1836. And then the troops here also used this musket, which is 1853 Tower rifle musket, which was made in England in 62. This was one of the ones used by surrendering federal troops here at Harper's Ferry. So in 1859, this guy, John Brown, attacked Harper's Ferry hoping to inspire a revolt against slavery. He wanted the arsenal's weapons that were here where this building once stood. His raid, however, come to a bloody end. His actions helped propel the nation into the American Civil War. And when fighting broke out in 1861, retreating U.S. troops burned down both federal arsenal buildings to keep weapons from falling into Confederate hands. And this is the location of one of those places that John Brown wanted to come and procure the weapons. Well, I'll be John Brown. Here's where John Brown made his last stand with the men that he bought here in 1859 to gain supporters, gain weapons. This is known as John Brown's Fort. 21 men gave their lives, and to commemorate their heroism, this tablet's placed on this building, which has been known as John Brown's Fort.
Flanking the U.S. line there, and once that line was captured, the last side of the heights overlooking Harper's Ferry was captured. They opened fire on the garrison here. 12
Barricade the door. The door. Remember what you're fighting for.
We're standing here still at Harper's Ferry, overlooking the heights here in Harper's Ferry and why this place was so strategic in the first place. And of course we got John Brown's Fort right here, which we really probably can't go inside. They had a tour in there, so probably don't want to walk in the middle of there and just shove a camera in their face. But this building where John Brown's Fort was originally used as the hose company or firehouse here for the arsenal. And in 1859, when John Brown come here, well, he used this building to, try to take over. So pretty neat to see it in person. Now, one more story before we get out of here that I want to tell you guys is probably one of the aspects that I think is coolest here in Harper's Ferry. Harper's Ferry during the Civil War and the bombardments and the 14 times it changed hands was absolutely devastated. Not just by the battle on the 12th through the 15th, but also those 14 times of being bombarded during the war. Well, there's one building that remained unscathed through all this, and that is the church you see the steeple of right behind me. The reverend of that church flew the British flag in hopes that his church would remain unscathed, and it worked. So at the end of the war, the only building in Harper's Ferry that saw no damage hardly from the war was that church due to that reverend flying the British flag over the top of the steeple. So pretty cool. And here's a look at what the armory looked like at the time in 1861. And you can clearly see this building here which is right here, John Brown's fort. Pretty neat. Just want to show you some of the original buildings still left here in Harper's Ferry. As we're walking, the John Brown Museum here. Pretty cool. So in this spot is the original John Brown's fort's place. And there's a monument here to it. The actual fort is down there. It once sat here. So here's the deal. After this happened with John Brown, they moved the building to Chicago. They took it down, moved it to Chicago, had it on expedition. Like 7 people only wanted to see it. And then they purchased it and brought it back here. And now this is where it sits. And if you look out to my front, this is where the original armory would have sat that the federal troops destroyed to keep it from falling in the heads of the Confederates. And you can still make out the outline of the building. And of course, there's markers everywhere there now. We are pressed for time, but you can clearly see where the armory once sat, right by the railroad. Here's a nice backside view of Harper's Ferry. Awesome little town. Could you imagine living here? And here comes a train. So Harper's Ferry changed hands 8 times during the war, and this was the Provost Marshal's office. And if you were in trouble, well, this is who would take care of you. And he regulated the military and civilian life and could jail and punish and execute officers. And this was the original Provost Marshal's office here on High Street in Harper's Ferry. Pretty neat. And as you exit onto the street, you get a good look at what Harper's Ferry could have looked like during the time. Most of these buildings are original or rebuilt, restored. Pretty cool. This was a vital arsenal for the Union Army. It sits right outside of the breadbasket of the Confederacy. You've got John Brown's raids here in 1859, which helps elevate and start the American Civil War. And then you've got this place exchanging hands as many as 8 times. And if, in my opinion, it's changed hands more than 8 times. You've got the arsenal here that has started producing so many weapons for the Union Army during the war. And it's one of the main things that helped fund the Union Army as far as firearms and weaponry. And right now we're standing in the heart of Harper's Ferry. Basically the main street of Harper's Ferry, where everything was. Behind me is the Provost Marshal's office. You've got the Boot and Saddle Company over here. You've got the shoemakers. You've got the bakery. You've got all kinds of stuff that would have been through this road. And then you also have behind me the arsenal buildings, which we talked about with John Brown's raid. And when the Confederates retreated out of here, when they surrendered when the Union Army retreated out of here, when they were getting ready to surrender to the Confederate Army, they burnt these buildings down. They wanted to destroy the weapons, the arsenal here at Harper's Ferry, because they didn't want it falling into Confederate hands, because that would be a very bad thing. But what the Confederates did do is they took all of the tools and things that they did use here to supply and build these rifles and different weapons, and they took them and spread them out. Some went to probably Richmond. Some went to maybe Georgia. So these things were distributed to help the Confederate cause and help them supply the war. And, well, instead of keeping Harper's Ferry, the Confederate Army left. And then the Union Army come back in and took it back over. So you've got this town being shelled all during the war, starting in 1861, all the way to the war's end in 1865. This town is seeing an absolute just hectic time during the whole history of the Civil War. And it's one of the most important cities for both sides during the war. So pretty cool to be standing right here in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. where all of this history went down, and it's pretty neat. So yeah, this is Harper's Ferry. All right, so guys, that's going to do it for here on this episode of History Saver. Don't forget to check out the History Underground, also Vlogging Through History, Project Past, the American Battlefield Trust, American Civil War, Adams County Historical Society, and we will see you on the next episode. We're headed back down south, so yeah, let's get on the road.